Ladies and gentlemen, it's Crow's Nest number 5. I'm joined here with, as always, my right-hand man, my crow homie, my chromie, Raffle Veek. Don't call me Raffle Veek7, and he's here to talk about stuff. So what's going on, dude?
Yeah. There's been a lot of things since the last Crow's Nest. How many months is it now?
Oh yeah, I just had that open, but of course I didn't check
Yeah.
it. It was... YouTube doesn't tell me that on the video page,
Please
so I have to
tell
go to
it's
watch
free.
it instead. So love that. This is 1 month. It just says 1 month ago. Okay, January 21st.
Oh,
There you go.
okay.
So it's a little bit more than a month, but you know what? We're here. I like how initially we were like, yeah, we'll probably do these like once a week or something. No. Turns out when you're really busy, finding time to talk about what you've been doing is not always easy to do. But maybe we can also get better at that as we find out more focus. And I will say,
well, you've been able to host the prototype on your own, right? So you
yeah,
had some of that for yourself, but
mostly because for people who aren't familiar, I've started my own solo podcast on my channel where I just cover a bunch of game design related activities and like thoughts and stuff. I was debating what channel to put it on, but I figured since it's just me for the most part, sometimes I will eventually have guests. I actually plan to have Veek on for an episode and we talk a little bit about some game design stuff later on, more like targeted with a very specific idea. But for now, it's just like, here's what I've been working on. Here are my thoughts. I'll probably have an episode out this weekend, actually, covering some stuff that maybe we'll get to in this episode. But for the most part,
like a devlog, basically, right?
Yeah,
like,
it's kind of similar to that. It's like an hour long each usually.
Yeah.
So it just sort of covers whatever ends up being useful as a way for me to like basically have a sounding board. But also sort of, I mean, it's many people can call podcast content kind of low effort content. And since it is very many times it's stream of consciousness stuff and there's not any editing, yeah, it's low effort content. But it's not like, I mean, it's practice for me to actually phrase my ideas and put them to good words. But also I am writing out like a bullet list or whatever of all the things I need to do and cover and things I want to talk about. And there is a theme with it. So it's not as like just push the record button and blab for a while as it seems. It is that, but it's more than that too. Anyway, this is also more than that. And I should mention that since we were talking about finding time to talk about the things that we're doing, we've already been finding time to do a lot of things. But one thing that is contributing to us being able to find a bit more time to do this sort of stuff is actually the coffee page. So we should shout out the page. It'll be linked in the description, of course.
Yeah, and we should shout out the amazing freelanders that've been supporting us.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do have the list, of course, buried away in some faraway website called co-fi.com/whatever it is. But we do. So we have two different things where one of them is for one-time payments and the other one is for monthly subscriptions. I won't bore you guys with all the details. You can check the stuff there, but special shout out, of course, to the people who have done it so far. Even the small numbers are pretty big, right? Like, we got Rob Kastov, we got Helltrix, we got Sherclastic. They're more on the smaller side of the spectrum compared to somebody like Luciferius or Mirian or Kian. But all these people are contributing in some fashion, and just also, I mean, you get a little bit of a benefit insofar as you get access to this chat where on our Discord server where we talk about some of the stuff that's the other people don't get to see yet. So there is something there for you guys if that's what you're interested in. But for the most part, it's just sort of a way that you can see you believe in the projects that we're working on and the stuff that we're doing, and that has definitely been I would say emotionally, for lack of a better term, or motivationally speaking, it's been nice to get that affirmation. Since it's one thing to have I already appreciated it when people were just contributing their time by playing the stuff we're making or, talking about it and engaging in the content and stuff. But it's another vector for that, basically, that also allows us to do more work on the stuff we want to do instead of, hunting for gig work or working day jobs or whatever, right? So.
Yeah, it's been pretty helpful. I've been able to afford myself a programming course from none other than Casey Muratori that you hosted on your on our No Frost Club channel, and
pretty good stuff right there. Cool. I was actually thinking, because obviously one of the other things that I haven't had as much time to do is, I mean, I've been courting a bunch of people for the podcast, right? The interview show, the Clubhouse Conversations, and that's where Casey comes in and Jonathan Blow has come in a bunch of times, and all this other stuff. But Unfortunately, I don't know if people are just super busy or if it's like what the time situation has been, but it's definitely been less effective at getting people in the door lately. And so usually it's the inverse, where like it's really hard to start, and then once you start, it's much easier to get more people. For some reason, it's been the opposite here, and it's mostly I think people just maybe their inbox is full or they're not checking their Twitter DMs or whatever, and that's fine too. But definitely one of the things that I've noticed is people do like that content. It's definitely the content that has the most views and the most interactions and stuff on the channel. I would say it's where a lot of people who discovered us through this channel discovered us through talking with people like Jonathan Blow and Casey Muratori. And so, the repeat guests in particular are usually easier to get because they all have a good time hanging out with us. So that's probably something that I will do is maybe once I end up subscribing to that programming course and checking it out, so I have a little bit more firsthand experience. But from what I've been told by you and just by what I've seen, irrespective of your involvement in it, it does seem like it's worth the money.
Yeah, I'd say so. So
there you go. That's what we call investing in the stuff that actually allows us, reinvesting in the content, right? Is that's what Veeq's up to. He's taken the money that you've given him and he's turned it into stuff that he can use to make content that you can play. So that's pretty good.
Yeah.
This is sort of like an open question. Maybe it's something that we should actually talk about, not openly, but I think it's probably fine to do it. We're usually fairly transparent. I was actually just thinking to myself, like, what is the idea? I think maybe if you've given us like a minimum amount of money as a supporter, you probably get like our first game, like a key, or what do you think? Because like you can construe it as like, then I guess you could construe it as like pre-ordering, which we obviously think is really bad for the industry, but I don't know. I also kind of feel like it's pretty cool if I can do something to like, the main issue is we shouldn't advertise it like that, which I guess is why maybe we shouldn't talk about it in a fucking public podcast. But you get the idea. It's it's not like you give us money ahead of time like a pre-order. It's more like a token of our appreciation is that, hey, we made the game. We think you'd be into it. Here's,
I don't think I would package it as like a deal that, if you, like I wouldn't make it a quota like, you donated this amount of money and we give you the game for free. I don't think we would do that necessarily, because then that would encourage that kind of behavior. And we would basically I think we would want to hand it to people that have most just contributed to what we do. Right?
Maybe irrespective of the money thing, right? Like Kian's been around for a lot longer, right? And so he's been like he's actually one of my oldest friends, which is really wild to think about now. In terms of like, I think I first met that guy in probably was 2012 or even earlier. So, a long time ago now. And obviously some of the other people in the community, Luciferius, Helltrix, Classic, these people have been around for a long time, back in like the Inconsummate days for the old heads lurking around from the Brood War days, back before we were working on our conversion. It was before CMBW even existed as its early renditions. So like super, super old school people in that sense. And so, like some of these people are just super old school. Maybe then it makes more sense because of their material contributions in addition, like, or their, whatever you would call it when you're not talking about the money side. But I don't know. I was just sort of musing on that. Like I think it's kind of overrated to be super distant from your people, like the people who are part of the community that you're building. Like some people will really try to keep everybody at an arm's length, and maybe because our community is a little bit on the smaller side, it's easier for me to say that it's overrated. But that approach of being super like distant and like sort of, like I actually care about like when people go through some shit and there just happen to be people who chat in the community or play the games or whatever. Like, if just like a random example, if like the Shambler or somebody like that is like, playing these games with us, and then I find out like, he had to deal with something or something good happened, like Luciferius gets a promotion or whatever the case may be. I'm like, oh shit, that's awesome. Like, I actually do have that investment in the community side of it, and so it's almost like a gift for a friend as opposed to a like payment for payment or whatever. You know what I mean? So like that's sort of how I would break it down. But again, I don't know if it's useful to think about it and try to package it. I definitely don't think we would advertise like, hey, if you're supporting us, you get a pre-order or whatever. Like that's obviously silly. So pre-orders have they encourage you to spend money before you have received the product. So I guess I would restate the principle of the coffee page is that you are supporting us because you believe in what we do, not necessarily because you're like, don't think about it like as a pretext for the game or whatever. I mean, I guess, I don't know. Like maybe based on our track record, we've demonstrated that we actually are competent, and it's more like a crowdfunding thing. But it's a strange, messy thing if you overanalyze it, probably. So just some musings on that. I don't know if you have much to add before.
Yeah, we just don't want to be yet another people who scam start, or even like we won't do that by principle. At least we will not do that, but you would not know that, I guess. But the thing is, like, we also just wouldn't want to give that impression that we are scam starters, I think. So
yeah, it's like in the coffee video that like when I announced the page on my own channel, it was like basically the pros and cons, and one of the cons is like some people will dismiss you as grifters or whatever, and I feel like because we're like avoiding microtransactions like the plague and all this other stuff. I mean, I guess it's possible that you can get somebody who's like espousing some beliefs which our community believes in and backs, but we're secretly like Bitcoin mining them or something. I don't know. Like, it's possible that that's happening, but pretty unlikely. Like, we're building RTS games. I think the RTS genre, like the market for the RTS genre, is fairly niche. Like, we still intend to we still have faith that we'll be able to get a decent amount of money to eventually be successful in general, whatever that looks like in terms of income, so that we can continue making games as our full-time occupation. But the idea that we're gonna grift people out or whatever, it's like we would probably be targeting a bigger, casting a bigger net, you know what I mean, like trying to get more people, like
I don't
to
think
the lowest
we
common
would be in
denominator.
RTS space.
Yeah, basically. And if we were, we would be like these Stormgate people to some degree, or
like
something
if we
like
started that. Like, if we really wanted that, we'd probably go mobile games or something.
Hey, that's actually, what? That ties into one of the things that we have to talk about, which is actually downstream of a coffee question, actually. So Rob Kastov, who has graciously sent us some threes, asked a question here, which I will also send to you so that I'm not the only one with access to it. I'll go ahead and paste that. So his question is, and it's a fairly lengthy question, so I probably will truncate it here, but I see, obviously he's referencing the fact that we had an initial Indie Fund pitch and it was not successful. And then we're doing another Indie Fund pitch, which we were aiming to get out by the end of February, but after speaking with Jonathan Blow a little bit, it seems like we're actually, we would be best served at polishing off some rough edges and stuff. Basically, I was asking him what are the hallmarks of a successful pitch, and cross-referencing that with what we had at the time, and okay, well, here's where we can improve our odds, basically. And so Rob Kastov asks, what do you think Indie Fund was unreceptive to your team's pitch? What or why do you think that? So why did they not accept our first pitch? And then what kinds of discussions did we have about how to improve, and any advice that Jonathan Blow gave? So actually, I guess I can touch on that as well, since that was one of the things. And there was also further questions about was it because of difficulty or genre or something to that effect? So to refresh everybody's memory, we were planning on doing a hybrid between a MOBA and an RTS, and it was a game called Onatar, The Pretense of War, and it has since been revised into a conceptual, a slightly more conventional game anyway. It's an RTS game, and it has some procedural elements to it that no RTS has ever attempted before. But the fact
it's a new take on Conquest RTSs, right?
Yeah. So there's a world map in Onatar, in the new version of Onatar. There's a world map. You claim territories in that world map, and each territory gives you the opportunity to customize your tech tree to some degree, augment a unit or change something about it. And the procedural aspect comes in the fact that the benefits of each territory are shuffled each run, and other things also change each run. But it's all I actually forget which one it is. I think it's input RNG is the one that is acceptable, because it's changing your spawn in a Brood War game or something. It's it's not changing the game.
The way they coined the terms is input RNG is basically RNG happening before player decision, and output RNG is one happening that affects after the decision.
Right, yeah. So the idea behind it is that neither of us are fan. None of us on the project team are fans of RNG affecting our decision making. We removed mischance and stuff from Brood War. We did a bunch of things to adjust that conceptually and get rid of randomness as much as possible, even down to a small amount. There's a very subtle amount of RNG in like a random delay between certain attacks in StarCraft 1, and that is so that multiple units that are attacking at the same time don't visually and audibly appear to fire their weapons at exactly the same time. And we removed that because even though it might look better for visuals, it's because it creates an inconsistency. And especially at high levels of skill expression, individual frames can matter. And sometimes it wasn't even individual frames, guys. It was like, 7 to 8 frames, which at 24 FPS is like, 1/3 of a second or whatever. It's like not.
We found some code that randomly delayed the next unit order by like few frames also.
Yeah, it's pretty insane how much stuff like that exists within Brood War. And I don't think StarCraft 2 is even I think StarCraft 2 has the same thing for attacks anyway, for the same reason, because of the audio stuff. Yeah. Probably not for the orders. So anyway, like this stuff is stuff we just don't believe in, even though we understand what reasons were for it. Like, it's the whole idea of like understanding the wheel before you try to reinvent it. We know why it was done, and we think that we can achieve, we think that either the solution that is there, like the problem that is being solved, is not actually much of a problem, or we can solve it in some other ways by like clever handling of the sound channels for the audio stuff, and for the visuals, it's very different.
Visually, like we can still have the delay for the visuals. It's technically possible.
Well, we could, but the other thing is we could just have varied versions of each muzzle flash or whatever, right? Like if that's the concern, like we could have 2 different versions of a Marine type unit shooting a gun. Like, okay, there's one version that's like, slightly off to the left or slightly longer or something, so that like visually they still look distinct, even though it's like slightly varied instead of significantly varied, and it still has no like RNG associated with actual output of the game and stuff. So anyway, back to the new version of Onatar. The idea is you've got this conquest map. Each territory gives you the opportunity to change based on like whoever occupied it before you came into the territory and claimed it through an RTS battle. You will get some sort of benefit that you can then use. These are called pretenses. These pretenses can be used to augment and change something about your tech tree, and it basically allows you to like customize your playstyle and stuff. And you can kind of see what pretenses are available across the entire map, so you can plot your course to like, okay, I want like this thing that might give me more attack speed or some other sort of attack oriented steroid, and then I also want to like follow that up with lifesteal, because those two synergize very well for sustained fights, and I want to avoid the one that like gives me something more burst oriented, so I don't even need to go there or whatever. And like there's other things that you have to consider about what to do about it, but we wanted to avoid RNG as much as possible while still having a procedural element. Anyway, that's a very experimental idea for an RTS game. Nobody, to my knowledge, has done procedural tech trees within an RTS to this degree, where it actually persists through each game in the middle of a run and all this other stuff. And it would still be a classical RTS in terms of how you play it, because you have this like the stuff that influences it from the conquest map and the pretense system, but you're still playing a conventional RTS by harvesting resources, building a base, etc. So it's not like a total war game where you only have the army or whatever. So there's a bunch of things about this that are, some of which are consistent with other RTS games, and many of which other things are inconsistent and new. And as a result of that, we decided to go for a simpler pitch. That's like the first main difference, is that the old version of Onatar was really weird and experimental because it was a MOBA RTS hybrid, and it had all of this other stuff about it. Like, it's not even a conventional MOBA where your heroes have experience and level up. It's like all of your power was dictated by items. So imagine a game of League of Legends or Dota 2 where instead of getting stronger abilities, you have all of your abilities downstream of items. So you pick like a starter weapon and it gives you an ability or something like that. And then if you compare that to like, so that's already experimental. And then the fusion of RTS where like there are RTS sized battles happening at the same time. I think it could be a really compelling game, but it was very, very experimental. Probably not, we were not in a stage where we could actually attempt it. Whereas in this case, we have our experimental RTS plan, which is what Onatar turned into, as I just explained. And then we also have, okay, here, what if we make a simpler game that has like less scale and less crazy stuff and more consistent, like more consistent with other RTS titles, basically. Like, basically, what if you just tried to make like, not that you don't have any ambition, but you're just trying to build like your version of a Brood War type game in terms of scale. Maybe you're going higher than that in terms of the tech tree depth and stuff. There's a lot of significant differences between what we were doing and what Brood War did, but that's like sort of the starter. So the first difference is definitely the scope of the projects that we are pitching, I would say.
Yeah, so I think a big lesson that the first pitch gave us is that we basically, like, we don't want to be as experimental, and we don't want to be like we still want to be ambitious, but we want to be ambitious in the space that we know, because that we know we can achieve. And it's just like there was a lot of feature creep in the original monitor, and we weren't able to exactly shape everything, and it wasn't all that great. And yeah, and I think the thing that was reported to you by one of the internal people in Indie Fund, right, was that like most games don't really get much attention, even, right?
Most pitches don't receive a response, and I think our pitch video received like 1 view, which is just an unlisted YouTube video. So like, I don't even know what counts as a view, so I don't know if that's actually true, but it sounds like not very many people have picked it up. So actually, yeah, that's the other thing, is that like, why do we think that Indie Fund was unreceptive? We don't know. The possible reasons could have included the ambition, or maybe nobody even noticed it because we didn't actually contact people internally until, like, you know, for any sort of ahead advice, the way that we have with Jonathan Blow now. And so, yeah, like a lot of that is probably, you know, who knows what it is. And that was kind of frustrating at the time because we didn't even have something that we could say, okay, let's like come back and you know, work on this because this is what we got for feedback. This is what they say. They, you know, were unreceptive because we didn't get anything like that. No response whatsoever. So, and you know, that's fine. Like, these people are all busy. They're all running their own businesses and stuff. So to some degree, that's fine. Like, I don't necessarily, maybe I did expect a response.
Yeah, no one does Indie Fund full time.
Yeah, exactly. So,
and only like, was it like only 1% of the games ever getting responses?
Yeah, that's what I said earlier. I mean, maybe it was, I don't remember what the percentage was, but it was a very small number of pitches get a reply at all, let alone funding. That was sort of like the rough quote of what I was told by someone who I contacted afterwards. And actually, that same person told us, like, one of the best ways to guarantee some sort of success is to get somebody on the, like, within Indie Fund to champion your game and back your game and say, like, I actually really think this is going to be good. And just by virtue of that, like, they force like the concept of the game to the forefront of many people's minds. Like, they force other people to take it up, right? It's like, I guess it's like the same philosophy of, I remember when I was like setting up a Patreon for somebody and I was like looking at all of the Patreon details and stuff. One of the things that they had said was like, if, like, you can ask your family and friends to sign on, even if you just pay them back secretly, because if more people see that, like, it's some deceptive marketing thing, basically. It's like, more people are doing that. Okay, well, I guess this isn't a total scam because other people are doing it. So it's sort of like that, but like a less predatory version of that, basically.
I believe that if you have a good product, all you need is the recognition, because then after recognition, people can just realize that it's good.
And yeah, that's where we hope that word of mouth will generally be our primary marketing force, both within Indie Fund, but also when we release the games, right? It's like, we don't necessarily want to have to take out a bunch of money to do ad campaigns and marketing and stuff. What we would like to do is contact streamers and other people who, you know, we have connections to and say, hey, dude, we made this epic game. It's in a genre you like, you know, or I don't know, like, here's, you know, whatever, here's a key, you can download it and play it. And like, so you give out a copy of the game for free. And, you know, if they're streamers or if they're YouTube, like, critics or games pundits or whatever you want to call that space, where you have like people who just make content, like video content and stuff, and you can send stuff their way. Like, I've got a bunch of channels who I subscribe to on YouTube who make interesting and thought-provoking content, or content that I find, you know, maybe they're like super specialized in one product. Like, I was watching I can't remember his name, of course, because I have to recall it for a podcast, but I was watching somebody who was doing like a very long retrospective on Halo Infinite, and having played that game somewhat recently, you guys may remember that I talked about it, ranted more like about it in one of the recent Crow's Nest episodes. But you know, I having played that, I was like, oh, okay, what is this guy who's been like a lifelong Halo fan, which I don't ascribe myself to, but I'm interested in that perspective. So even if I don't like agree with them, because I actually think Halo is pretty overrated, I might be interested in like, what does this guy think? So like, if he's, you know, there's loads of people like that who I'm familiar with, who, you know, at the very least, I have some interest in maybe reaching out to them afterwards and being like, hey, dude, here's a game. You know, I guess the Halo example probably doesn't you know, pass muster. It was just a random example off the top of my head, but, you know, like Upper Echelon is one example. Like, he used to do a lot more gaming content. Now he does like, you know, crazy almost like actual investigative journalism. I don't even know. Maybe the window's over where like we can't really reach out to him for game stuff anymore because he's graduated. But like people like that would be really interesting, I think, to ask for information on. I know a bunch of people from Counter-Strike when I do my esports work who also have overlap with Brood War because they're both like relatively hardcore, esports games in that sense. So I could ask some of those people. So there's like loads of opportunities where when we do release the game, we can like reach out to a bunch of people who would in turn say like, okay, well, I know these people, I trust these people, I'm going to check their game out. Maybe I'll post about it, or maybe I'll make content about it, maybe I'll stream about it or whatever. And that can kind of take care of itself. And hopefully that's enough to, a lot of this is experimental in the marketing side too. Like, I don't know how successful that's going to be relative to putting ads out. Like, I kind of feel like ads are just useless. But like unless you have a really crazy amount of money, because if you have a really crazy amount of money, like there's this phenomenon where you need to go buy a product like months after you last saw an ad about something, but you still remember the name of the brand from that ad. And so that maybe is your default when you go to buy a product, right? Like stuff like that can happen, but you need so much money to just saturate ads everywhere. And like, I don't really want to do that because I actually find that to be really annoying.
I don't know. I can't remember ever actually learning about something in an ad and actually like I don't think ads ever had like a conversion rate on me.
Well, I'll give you an example. Like I was looking up, I can't actually remember what specifically I was looking up. I think it was like a green screen or something. And because I had like a long time ago, I had looked up a green screen and there was like some sponsored shit. Or maybe it was because I was like watching a YouTuber and they had said that they just got a green screen and they gave the brand name out. Like that was enough for me to think, oh, maybe I should get that. Even though I know nothing about the product besides like somebody else used it or whatever.
Well, word of mouth is different because I would trust, like if you told me that I should get a Blue Yeti, I would get a Blue Yeti like I did.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Well, I'm just saying that same mechanism can happen even if it's just an ad, because the ad can be doing the same thing. Like especially if it's a sponsored plug for somebody who you might trust in other ways. Like if I take a sponsor on having recommended the Blue Yeti to you, and then the sponsor is for something that you end up like in the market for, whatever that kind of product is, then, maybe you would just default to knowing, oh yeah, there's that thing that sponsored him. Like if you decide you really want coffees and then I get sponsored by coffee or whatever, you get the idea. So yeah, I don't know. It can happen, but I and maybe to whatever degree it's successful, it's kind of subconscious too, and maybe we just don't.
Yeah, that might be it. But I generally feel like I personally just don't find ads credible at all. So like they are not very credible. It's not like expertise is behind ads. Ads are just something that you pay for, so it like gets streamed to as many people as possible, and it's like very subconscious. I feel like. Yeah. Anyways. As a tangent, yeah.
Well, it's all related in some way. I just feel like whatever, like word of mouth is definitely really strong as an idea, and hopefully it can carry. Hopefully it can carry through to Jonathan Blow, who can then carry it through to the Indie Fund, and then hopefully it can work as well when we just reach out to a bunch of people, and like if Artosis plays our game, and so on and so forth plays our game. Like, oh, these people are considered authorities in some way, so like other people trust their recommendation. Of course, they're going to check it out. So yeah, I feel like there's potential for that, right?
Yeah. I feel like with games, like the most successful stuff outside of word of mouth would be, like if you have a really good trailer and it's like it's really showing up something unique about the game, and you've been looking for that, maybe that would be really good. Like,
oh yeah, so that's our other gambit, right, Veeq? Is that we are expecting, and I think. Based on our own, this is actually something we included in the first pitch, if you remember. It was like the market feels empty and devoid of actually good games to play, and like we're hungry for that. And all of the people who are on our own team and in our own community have said, "Oh, we're really interested in whatever you're working on." And it's like that might be enough for like that side of things, where it's like, okay, you might not know any of the people that we know to reach out for the word of mouth side, but if you happen to still, if somebody links it to you or somebody posts it and you happen to see the trailer and then you watch the trailer and the trailer is like showing off RTS battles that look really interesting and unique and stuff, and or even just like evocative of like something like a Brood War or something like a Command and Conquer, I don't even know, like whatever some of these classic RTS games are that haven't really been created, and you were looking for like the next version of that, like an evolution revolution on that concept, then you might be in the market for that thing without maybe even consciously knowing it, and then you get shown that it exists, and that could also, as you're saying,
I feel like so many people actually, like, if you think of any RTS fan from an old game, like, you would think that they would want a sequel, right? But all the sequels to all the original RTSs are not really sequels. They are just like articles or something.
Yeah,
like, they don't really actualize the original game.
They are very, very distinct. They don't represent a step forward for sure. It's like, even if some things are better, like, I don't know, I'm really reticent to say that StarCraft 2 did anything better, but I guess, like, you know, having multi-building select is probably pretty easy to, I mean, like, obviously it made worse by smart casting, but it's like, okay, that's, I guess, like, control scheme stuff or whatever. Like, the fact that you can, okay, here's one thing that's obviously better about StarCraft 2 is the fact that you can remap your hotkeys natively. Remastered allowed that, I guess, so maybe that changes it, but, like, compared to the original game.
Remaster is in Chromium, though. So
I know. I always, like, you know, shout out to Necron, man. There's one time he really made me laugh when we were working on a project in Remastered and we were looking at a replay or something. And he said that he thinks that every single health bar is a Chrome tab or something. That really got me. It's just like, why did they put Chromium into their game? And also shout out to Five Nations, since you guys literally made your fucking whole game in Chromium. That's Jesus. Man. Yeah. That's so crazy. But yeah, I mean, like, I think Five Nations actually is a case where, like, it's not like I did a Let's Play of it. And I should also say, like, these guys have helped us out behind the scenes. They've said, like, they've given us permission to use their assets, even if we were to release a game with them, which is crazy. Like, most of the time you're never going to get that. We're not going to do that because we want our own art. But that was something that they said, like, the Twardan is the screen name of the main developer. And he said something to that effect. And I was really grateful for that opportunity. Like, maybe we can use it as part of the indie fund pitch or something, because we have commercial permission to do it, and, like, it's placeholder stuff and we'll fix it later or something. Like, that was something that we could do, right? And so I really do appreciate that. That being said, the game is not great, and a big part of it is that it doesn't work super well because it's in Chromium, and another big part of it is because it doesn't really evolve the core idea of what an RTS campaign at the very least should be. Like, I actually think if there was multiplayer, which the game doesn't have multiplayer, which is another big knock against it, then you would actually see, I mean, there'd be a lot of balance problems based on my understanding of how the game worked. Like, they have the golf cart units that I forget the name of. I think Gloom was the name of it has really good names. What was the Digestivator? That was a really good name. They have really good names in the project, but you know, like, some of their units have, like, you know, they just bypass shields entirely or whatever. Like, there's some things that are, like, really wacky mechanics, but aside from the balance changes, at least it would be really cool to see, like, the interplay between all 5 of the races, because 5 nations, they have 5 different races. That's really cool because most of the time you see less than that, but there's no multiplayer. And the skirmish AI isn't super competitive, although I did appreciate the fact that it expanded and teched up and stuff. So at the very least, it was, like, probably better than Brood War AI and stuff. So, like, there's some cases where they do more interesting things, and then there's a lot of other cases where it's just like, well, I guess we're going to have a campaign where all of the enemies are pre-placed and the AI never expands, and the AI sends, like, 2 units at you or whatever and rarely threatens you. And also sometimes we're going to have micro missions and a fucking tower defense mission and all this other stuff that's just like, wow, what gimmick can we think of today, Tony? So a lot of the times it does feel like it's pretty bad, at least in terms of the campaign content. And the skirmish content was definitely more compelling and interesting to me, and I did appreciate that a lot more. So, like, and that's an indie game, and it probably didn't take too long to make. I mean, hats off to them for having all the art assets for 5 races and stuff. That was cool. And you know, like, whatever, like, they did stuff, right? They made a game. Yes, it was in Chromium. Yes, it didn't really work super well. Yes, every, like, 8 missions, I would get flashbanged, and because there was a load-bearing memory leak in the game code base because Chromium, and I'd have to restart the game. Yes, all of that stuff is hilarious / unfortunate, but
and yes, you did make a game to run the game for a year.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. How could I forget? I tried to play the game when it came out, and it just never worked. So I couldn't actually play the game for over a year. Yeah. If we just release our game and it doesn't have those Chromium-related problems, I think we're already in a pretty good spot, because our campaign content is going to be fucking revolutionary compared to what everybody is used to. And that alone is going to be enough. So you spoke earlier about us being ambitious. We want to be ambitious, but with what we know, I think a large portion of the change between this pitch and the previous one, to get back to Rob's question and sort of finish, I guess, Rob's question, is I felt like the fact that we're going for, like, a more like single player oriented or co-op oriented experience, we're not really focusing too heavily on player versus player, although we can talk about that later too, because obviously we've been doing that with CMBW, is the fact that we're focusing on like telling an actual story and not having it conflict with the gameplay super much. Like a lot of the conversations I've had with Jonathan Blow on this channel have been centered around that exact conflict, especially the last episode, the third episode. And we think about that stuff. It's like recalibrate your sense of what is ambitious and compare it to what is out there in the like, has there been an RTS campaign that hasn't done all of these really obvious flaws to us? Like most people are not going to think of them as obvious because most people are just going to be used to the status quo, right? And because we've been through the looking glass on that side and we've seen like actually it's super obvious you would want like an actual challenging AI that expands and takes control of the map and doesn't start with the whole map under their control and actually has some relevant strategy that corresponds to their personality as a character. It's like this guy's really aggressive and he keeps dropping me, what an asshole, like stuff like that, versus here's like 2 units or something and like here's a bunch of stuff you have to slog through. Yeah.
Like StarCraft 2 is a primary, like it's a big example of what not to do.
Yeah.
Like especially like Legacy, I think is the biggest offender from all the expansions that they did, because like it's like super scripted. It doesn't have any dynamic gameplay. You don't even expand in most missions. It's like 90% of the gameplay, maybe not 90, but a lot of the gameplay is outside of mission too, where like all your tech customization is like on the ship or whatever. And like you just get like every time there's an attack coming, you get the same dialogue.
That a lot of the time there's telegraphs, and it doesn't make any like I was actually thinking, obviously, we have those birthday maps where we made scenarios, campaign style missions, basically, single player most of the time, although I guess there was like co-optional stuff sometimes, but for the most part, it was single player stuff. And there would sometimes be dialogue events but they were all based on like characters reacting to the plays. And so if you it's very simple stuff, but if you kill 100 units, that's like a common thing. Or if you destroy somebody's expansion, or they destroy your expansion, or your ally dies, or an enemy player is eliminated, or something like that, right? All of these have dialogue events associated with them. And because they were birthday content, it was like, funny inside joke references, and these were all made like bespoke maps for each individual people as like a celebration of their contribution to the community. It goes back to what I was talking about earlier, where like I feel invested in the people of the community. It's like, yeah, here's a birthday map, dude. Like, thanks for being around and appreciate you in general. And here you go, have a celebration. So stuff like that was happening, and so as a result, the framing of the mission was very silly and slapstick almost, and like maybe even farcical. It's like, there's a map and my brother voice acts in it, and he like, he's got a dog and it's just me making a dumb sound. And like that's silly. Like that's not really like what you would normally expect out of an RTS, but especially considering the scale of these missions involves like building giant amounts of bases and armies and stuff. So it's like really weird to most people probably, but that's just like the kind of humorous style that we've settled on for the birthday maps. And as a result of that, despite that fact that it's silly, you still get this sense that like the characters are doing stuff, right? And like responding to what you're doing, because they have dialogue that responds to it. And then that dialogue is written with an understanding of what the AI is going to do in the mission in terms of like style, right? So you wouldn't have, for example, an AI that is basically running some sort of script that does very defense-oriented turtle like, heavy tech greed stuff where they're not really doing much on the map, but then have the character that is representing whoever is leading that AI controlled faction. You wouldn't have that character come across as super aggro and wanting to rush you down and stuff. Instead, you would have him be more measured and slow. And maybe like if you attack his expansion, he's just like, I have like 12 others. Like I'm like, that's not even going to help you or something. Like he reacts differently, right? And so like just that alone is enough to have some kind of like low resolution version of what we're going to be doing with our game in all of our games in terms of the content side, but our first game especially, where maybe we don't have something super revolutionary in terms of tech trees compared to our Brood War conversion, Cosmonarchy Brood War. Maybe it's very similar in terms of the depth of the tech tree. Like it's not going to tier 5 or tier 10 or whatever. It caps at tier 3 for the most part. Like that's our current plan. But if you have this situation where the content is still so much better, where you're actually playing an RTS the entire time and you're against an AI that's also trying to beat you by the rules of an RTS, it's already going to feel so much better than every RTS campaign you've played hitherto. And so I just think about it like that. And it was hard for us to think about that as ambitious because we've already kind of explored that. We've already kind of done that. Or at the very least, we've established that conceptually, we really don't like when people don't do these things and instead do the StarCraft 2 approach, where you get dialogue events telling you, guys, fall back, don't go into the enemy base, even though that's like a core way to interact with an enemy. Like that's so just actually disgusting to me that happens. And it's just so anti-interaction.
Just think of what toxic habits it actually teaches you as an RTS
Sure,
player.
yeah.
Like, try play. So, like, if someone never played RTS and he beats like StarCraft 2 campaigns, he thinks, "Oh, I now know something about RTSs." Then he goes to the melee, and he sees no objectives. He sees no dialogues, and what he's gonna do. What he's gonna attack the base. That's not what I'm supposed to do. Like,
right,
judging by what campaign says. So.
Yeah, I'm supposed to just like destroy the enemy, like, you know, big important things that the enemy has, like Age of Empires fucking relics or something. I don't know, like you know, or what is it? Not monoliths. What is the term for Age of Empires when they build like the one monument type thing? It's like wonders. That's what it is. Yeah, wonders.
Yeah.
So like oh, I got to destroy all the wonders, bro. Like something like that more than actually defeating the enemy.
Yeah. And then like imagine introducing to a player like that. Imagine introducing the concept of harassment. Like,
oh yeah,
dude, the enemy has workers and he mines.
Yeah, that's right. Because they gave up. They totally gave up in some of these later missions. Like Heart of the Storm started it. Well, maybe there was also true in Wings of Liberty. But a lot of the StarCraft 2 enemies don't even harvest resources anymore. They don't even bother.
Yeah.
They have like an orbital command somewhere, and they just don't even bother doing anything with it.
Yeah. So you know how there's this technicality about the StarCraft 2 maps that I know. Most of the campaign maps have hidden invincible tech on the top left corner of the map for all the AI players.
Yeah,
and they also have a unit called Super Warp Gate, which is a Protoss building that allows you to warp in anything for free, even the units that don't have warping in the game.
Oh right, yeah, that's where they were warping in like Immortals and stuff.
Yeah. It's funny how they had to do it by a unit and not by like a trigger or something because their engine didn't support that.
Apparently, you can't have like we have a create unit custom trigger in our Brood War mod where it says like, you know, style of creation, and it includes the opportunity for you to spawn them like Zerg stuff as if they came in a drop pod and shit. And eventually, if we actually do it, support like something like a drop pod situation, we can do that as well. The fact that it's not a trigger, yeah, that is really. I mean, they still needed a trigger anyway. They needed the trigger to order the unit, so I don't know why they couldn't make it an actual trigger actually instead of having a hidden unit somewhere.
XD. Yeah. It's because of the data module being so trash and uninteractive. Yeah. But the other thing that they did is they have a trigger with long ways where they add all the upgrades because the AI will not research upgrades.
Yeah, there's that. Yeah. There's obviously the fact that they don't really bother expanding is a big deal. Like if you erase,
I don't think there's a mission in campaign where they do actually expand. I don't think that happens. They always get the bases set up, and all they maybe do is like rebuild them with bullies.
Yeah. Well, I always think back to like there's some mission in Wings of Liberty where you're in a jungle, Protoss shrine thing. You're capping Terrazine with the workers. Yeah. Which, by the way, looks absolutely ridiculous because they didn't bother changing it so that like the SCV carries it with both of its like hands or whatever. So you just see this giant Terrazine canister like being moved around as if it were a tiny resource pickup in one hand. Dude, it's so silly. But like that's a separate thing.
Of something.
Okay.
There's a ridiculous problem in StarCraft 2, like a writing problem or whatever, with Tal'Darim. They are completely stupid. And
there's 3 different versions of them, if that's what you mean.
In Wings of Liberty, they're no more Protoss, like yellow ones. And then in Heart of the Swarm, they're like the black, green, Narazim kind.
Yeah. And then obviously in Legacy, they're the
Legacy, it's the red custom thing. They didn't even bother updating the previous missions, so it's visually correct. So
yeah, well,
terrible.
You know my opinion on updating old content. We actually talked about that in a previous episode. But yeah, I know what you mean. Like obviously they didn't plan it out. It's the StarCraft 2 version of the like Skywalker saga or whatever, the sequel trilogy. Like just having it for Star Wars being completely fucked up, where they just like messed up all of the stuff. They didn't actually like nail it down. Or Marvel is bad for this too, where they just have like oh, we were gonna do this, and that, like Thanos is like blue instead of purple in one of the movies, for example, and it's like shit like that. It's like little stuff like that, but also it gets bigger. Like there's like a post-credit scene where they have like a different voice actor and a different, like, because they just didn't plan it ahead, right? Like they didn't plan ahead for all this stuff. So not enough for it to matter or whatever. So yeah, like StarCraft 2 obviously has the same issue where, I mean, remember Zeratul was supposed to be the protagonist for Legacy of the Void. They talked about it all over the place when they first announced like the way that the campaigns were going to go.
Just kill him.
Well, to be fair, I would also want to kill him.
I think you would want to kill every character in that setting.
I did like that he gets Goku'd by Artanis in the anime fight. I also liked when he grabbed Kerrigan's face and like mind raped her or something. Like, honestly, if you really look back at like StarCraft 2, like that jungle mission I was talking about where you're capping Terrazine and you're fighting Tal'Darim, or first Tal'Darim, not the second or third Tal'Darim. The subtext of that mission is Raynor is like a lunatic who's coming in and just like absolutely annihilating some religious people. And he like when they're like, hey, you can't come into our sacred ground, he's just like, oh, look at these silly religious people trying to stop us from stealing their resources. Like, what the fuck? Like, what is the context? So like, I'm really surprised. I mean, Blizzard gets canceled sometimes and really never for a lasting reason because of all the stolen breast milk and shit. But like, I still can't believe this is a real thing. Like the actual subtext here that they thought this is a real, yeah, of course, Raynor's like a good guy, bro. Like for all the wokeism nonsense that you hear all the time in all the different places, I'm really surprised that there wasn't something more more of a response to that. Like, how is that not just obviously don't do that, guys? But you know what? This is the same writers team.
I think Blizzard was trying to kill the setting anyways, right? Like, there's been some effort done to kill StarCraft 2 and stuff.
What do you mean by setting? Like the actual universe?
The actual like franchise or whatever. They don't want StarCraft to be their game anymore. Like they don't want to like.
Well, they abandoned the esports side, and I guess now pro players are doing the fucking balancing, which is hilarious. But I don't know much about the internals. Obviously, they didn't. They have like one guy occasionally pushing a button to change the map pool every year in remastered. So I don't know what else is going on. But yeah, they've really bungled everything. And don't worry. At least they added Chromium and microtransaction infrastructure to remastered, and then they didn't even use it. Actually, they added like the skin stuff, but
I think that if people didn't wake up after Warcraft Reforged, it's probably hard to wake them up at all. Yeah. It's like this company is just none.
The good news is, just like they gave us a lesson on what not to do for StarCraft for single player RTS content with StarCraft 2, they also gave us a lesson on what not to do with their actual fucking company. So you really don't have to worry about us doing the same thing. I promise you, I will never steal breast milk from an employee fridge. I will never make that mistake. It's like the story of the fucking rioters, like one of the guys just farting in employees' faces is like a fucking hazing ritual or something. Like these people are fucking mental, mate. They have no grounding. So yeah, I think that's probably that's a good place to. Oh yeah, the last thing from Rob's question, which has been a fucking roller coaster of an answer. I'm sure he's very happy with it. He got his money's worth for this question. Any advice that Jonathan Blow gave you guys? So yeah, this is sort of like the last point on the difference between the pitches is obviously we talked about like being ambitious with the design of the content, and also we're going to be ambitious with the story and the setting and stuff. We're going to actually have like I'm a big fan of Rob Ager, and he's a film critic and analyst who sort of covers like hidden narratives within stuff. And I think I figured I would use this opportunity with this simpler project compared to something like Onatar or something like Cosmonarchy Retail or whatever to try to play around with hidden narratives within the work. So what you're going to see is basically there's like a lot of stuff that might seem just like window dressing, but actually has a deeper meaning. And if you choose to engage with that, then you might get something good out of it. And if you don't choose to engage with that, then you can still enjoy probably the best RTS experience, right? So you don't really have to worry. You can kind of take it or leave it. I know some people play games and they just think any story in a game is silly. And I kind of agree in most of the times, most of the cases, but and then, when you separate that out from that, it's just like, here's something that you can pay attention to if you really like stuff, like you're paying attention to that sort of stuff. So that was one thing for sure. But the advice that was given to us by Jonathan Blow was to make sure that we basically it's like him stating that if we can get like the closer we can get the project to what the final cut is in terms of like a vertical slice, like you're not going to have all the content finished. You're not going to have like all of the different tools and stuff finished. Like in an RTS, you won't have the entire tech tree finished and not all the races will be finished. But if you can give a good facsimile of what the experience is going to end up being, and maybe anything that's left out, you can explain what's missing and what will be changed and stuff. And ideally also, like, people do care about visuals. He cited an example where he submitted an early version of Braid back when Steam still required you to clear your games with Valve before they made Steam Direct. He submitted an early version of Braid that still had, programmer art, as he calls it, and Valve rejected it basically on those grounds, is the subtext I heard. And as a result of that, he basically, like, he was using that as an example of, like, I think he's talked about this before as well in some of his shows about Braid, or his talks about Braid, but he uses that as an example of, like, yeah, you'd think people, especially people at Valve, would know, like, this is a game versus this is like a finished product or whatever. Like, this is a pitch for my game and what have you.
Yeah.
And like, it was all the same gameplay stuff as far as I know, or similar. So anyway, that's all one thing. But I think we could take a page out of his book, learn a lesson from what he did. And what he was trying to instruct us with was finish, do something to get a first art pass done. Don't just go in with super basic, like, primitive shapes and recolors and stuff, and try to see if you can, get some sort of close approximation of what the final art style might look like or whatever. And so we're going to try to do that at the very least to indicate, like, we're still using maybe early version textures or something. Maybe the resolution detail is going to increase or what texel density or whatever. But for the most part, we're going to have, improvements to that. And that's pretty much the main bit of advice is, like, make sure that we're representing, like, representing what the project will become as closely as we can, given the situation. And hopefully that will be enough to, bridge the gap of somebody reading the plans for it and somebody imagining what the final product will be. And that will give them the most easy opportunity to actually read that, right? So I think that's the main thing.
Yeah, so hopefully it wraps up the question from Rob. Yeah, I'm not sure if there's anything else to add. I think I would like to discuss a bit about CMBW if you think that's the...
Yeah, sure. We can talk about that for a little bit. What you got in mind?
Since the last episode, there's been a lot of development, and it's honestly, like, it feels like the mod started blooming finally.
Yeah.
After all it's not like the AI games weren't cool, but now we actually have, like, melee games, and there's, like, community, and there are castovers, so a lot of things have changed. And the other thing that has changed is the game, actually, because it's since the last Crow's Nest, like, the tech tree progression has altered, and, like, balance changes have altered, and we have, like, reworked some behaviors. We have finalized, maybe not finalized, but we finished the initial initial reclamation, for example, which is really big. It's something that we wanted for a long time. And it just feels like the game is the mod is getting into a better state. And, like, even small things like bunker landing sound is really epic. And the bunker model is actually a big change. And then we have... it's interesting how, after all the changes, like, sort of the finalized result is how all the fractions are sort of core to their identity. And the example that we repeatedly mentioned between ourselves is how applying liftoff to all the structures made Terran more Terran.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I don't know if you want to talk a bit about that.
Yeah, so one of the ideas that we have, and something that I referenced in an episode of Prototype, is talking about how CMBW has basically helped all of the races feel like themselves, but to a greater degree. So you get what you normally get out of Terran, which is this sort of like opportunity to mech creep, and you have like phalanxes as powerful defensive tools, which is our name for the siege tank. We've got bunkers, watchdogs, which is our name for the missile turret. You got vultures with their mines, all this stuff, right? That's in the normal StarCraft. Now you add on to this with the opportunity to build sentinels, these advanced towers that do a line trace damage, so they hit anything in a line. You can imagine very good for anti-bio or anti-air and stuff that's like stacked up. Then you have, obviously the fact that any unit can go in a bunker now as long as it fits. And if it has a ranged attack, any unit can fire from a bunker. And so you can put 2 Goliaths in a bunker and that will fit. And obviously their anti-air is pretty good and they benefit from the bunker range and all this other stuff. The fact that the bunkers themselves can lift off, units can't fire while it's in air, but the idea is still there. You can land them and then they can shoot and all this stuff like this. It ends up being really, really impactful because what you actually see as a result is you see an initial defensive line be established, and then they can creep that forward together with everything else. Or, they can try to build it on site and creep it forward. We have seen some cheesy plays where people lift a bunker and put it in the enemy's base and try to kill their workers with it. But it's super slow, right? So it's not like, it's a little bit faster than in default StarCraft, but it's not really fast enough for it to be like, oh, this is really going to kill my opponent unless they really don't pay any attention, right? Or you manage to really sneak it somewhere.
You can still stop the landing if you...
Yeah, you have a unit underneath. And that's actually one of the reasons why I added a landing sound to Terran units or Terran structures is when their landing sequence starts, they play a sound that tells you, okay, I can prepare for the landing to happen because I know it's happening. Like it was successful. Because sometimes when you were trying to land it and your enemy was trying to block it, it might not be obvious when it actually starts to land until maybe a little bit after. So like just increasing the reaction. And it also kind of makes sense is what I told Veeq. I was like, yeah, if it's going to start, if this big structure is going to start landing, it kind of makes sense that it would have the opportunity to like make a sound to warn people. Hey, this is.
It's also just very thematic for Terran. You hear like you have this short-link base defending. Like I saw you defend against Mesk, and he's like air fleet from Brothers, and you just like you lifted all your structures trying to rearrange. It's just beep beep beep.
Yeah. And it feels it's kind of like when we first implemented the Paladin way back, which is a Terran walker that fires a salvo of missiles, and when it locks onto its target, it plays like a warning sound almost like. And when we added that warning sound, which because it previously didn't exist in a very early version of the unit, it suddenly made the unit feel way more scary. Like, oh shit! And it's just an audio cue, but it's like somehow reinforcing, like almost like you said, thematics. And it's like the imposition, right? It's like, oh man, like, I have to actually fear this.
Funny because I mentioned like we have this ion cannon rework pending.
Yeah.
Where the unit will actually first like shoot this marker and the marker will like beep and it will like actually prepare you for the shot. But even though that makes Ion Cannon weaker because you can react to it, so it gives more counterplay, it actually makes the unit feel even more powerful because now there's this like preparation for Impa.
Anticipation you have that something's going to happen. Yeah. Like it's like if you remove the nuke tracker, like obviously nukes would be more powerful, but then you wouldn't have the whole like ceremonious aspect of like nuclear launch detected. Oh shit. And then the sound, if you happen to be in the area when you see it, it's like the sound of the laser locking in, and it's like, oh shit. Like all of that stuff works together as like building your anticipation for this big moment. It's like the Star Sovereign channel too. Yeah.
I love when we play team games and there's a nuke and then everyone is asking, oh, is that you guys? Or are they
is that us? Yeah. I like when we did it against AI, especially because sometimes the AI would nuke like crazy, just absolute like relentless nuking.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, what the hell? And yeah. And so like if you're not really, because the other thing is that for whatever reason, when we play Melee, right, or Pr0nogo, as we're going to do later today as on the recording date, when we play it with the homies, there is some weird thing where we all like, because we're all in the community, we all want to be on the same like voice channel. So we don't say everything that we're doing. We don't like communicate like a team normally would. It'd be like if you're playing Counter-Strike, but your enemy could hear all your comms, you wouldn't say as much stuff, right? And like you might not even say I need help. You might just ping, like stuff like that, because you just want to do something without indicating that you're even like maybe the information of you were saying. Like bringing attention to your thing, like the fact that your enemy knows that, like you get into all these mind games, right? So it can get pretty complicated, but as a result, you don't know when somebody's going nukes unless you're actually looking at their base, So like you might not know your allies nuking. That's why you're like, wait, is that us? So Yeah, pretty
Yeah,
good.
that's pretty epic.
Yeah.
There's another thing I wanted to talk about. I'm not sure if we have enough time, but I was curious to ask you about your thoughts about pacing as of right now.
So, for people who don't know, CMBW versus default StarCraft has 6 workers that start instead of 4. That's been a change for a long time. And we feel it also starts off with 100 minerals instead of 50. We felt like this allowed you to do more interesting strategies, but and maybe it does, like maybe it's still fine, but it is something that I was thinking about is we are also aware that in the current convention, the meta that's developed between the players of the server, and none of us are very good, none of us are very skilled, but if you do have a lopsided skill differential in the context of a match, it usually resolves, like the match ends in like 5 minutes sometimes, or 10 minutes at the more extreme times.
Yeah.
And even if the game doesn't actually end because all of the enemy factories are not destroyed, you still have a situation at your hands where maybe the game was decided, but the other person just hasn't GG'd yet or something. And so that does feel like maybe there's like 2 things that I would like to point out, like my observations or thoughts or whatever, because obviously the way that we try to do balancing is we don't really like to knee-jerk change things because of one instance or one thing. Sometimes one thing is all you need as a sanity test or whatever, like, oh shit, this is obviously busted. But for the most part, when you're looking at stuff, it's like, okay, this seems powerful. To what degree is its power just sort of intrinsic, and to what degree is its power seemingly magnified because of poor play or something to that effect, or like novelty, or because somebody didn't know what it did or whatever. And there's so many things in the tech trees that novelty can certainly play a factor. So anyway, when we think about all these stuff, my observations or thoughts are currently that the pacing of the game does feel like the early game is a bit too volatile for my liking, and I would like not necessarily that there's less decisions to make, but I do think there's value in even just like 1 extra minute before action happens without making it so that you're not making choices. So I don't really know what that would look like, because if you reduce worker count or you drop the starting minerals down or whatever, you would give yourself a little bit of time, maybe an extra couple seconds or whatever.
Yeah, so
But
I've been thinking about that for worker change. I feel like that doesn't really help that much, because like during the time you don't really make decisions. It's like maybe you have an easier split or something, but like it's not really that impactful. I feel like I've been feeling I'm you probably disagree, but I feel like it would be better if some of the tech in tier 1 was a bit delayed, and then I don't know. I feel like the tier 1 could be bigger in itself, because it's like you kind of feel like you want to run away from it as of right now. At least that's my feeling. Maybe that's not true. But I was thinking that if you would like delay air units by like additional minute or something, then you would actually have more space to shine for like, I don't know, zealots, vultures, the bio units, etc. But
I don't know if air units are a big contributing factor. It probably is very matchup dependent. Most of the time in versus Terran, you're not worried about air at all. You might be worried about transports, but you're not really worried about wraiths. Although they can be quite successful, but they're just not super meta right now in terms of the people who have been playing. I'm sure somebody could break the meta very easily by trying it. That's another thing, is we don't really know what is strong because the players and playstyles are starting to become more familiar to each other, and what is strong because it's actually strong. I think the easiest way to do the air thing you're talking about is obviously just to make it so that you have to cap geysers to mine from them, but that's pretty stupid. So like we've invested a lot in avoiding that so you can harvest gas directly. But, you know, I mean, like one thing that we could definitely try experimenting with, a lot of this stuff, by the way, like we make all custom maps. We don't have any old maps from the old stuff. We don't have any maps from pro play. So all of our maps are custom, and a lot of them have been considered relatively unsafe or too open for more conventional play anyway, or whatever. And so maybe it's a map design thing that we can also attack it with that. Obviously, we've been thinking about resource balancing and whatnot to also affect pacing.
Yeah, I've been experimenting a lot, both with like additional safety and resources and repulsion, the newest map I made.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll just have to experiment with that for sure.
I mean, maybe if we make it so that the Vespene nodes are farther away than the minerals, that would be one thing. Like, it sounds kind of wild, but if all races have an opportunity to drop a forward town center, like a town outpost, right? There's the Crucible for Protoss, the Treasury for Terrans, and the just an extra macro hatch for Zerg. Like, if that's something you can do, then maybe it's fine.
Well, but then you don't get any gas.
Well, no, you do. You just distance mine it, right? So it's slower. Obviously, that would be like, again, I'm saying like if you improve your mining by expanding to it, then it's a decision. But like you could imagine, as an example, you've got a melee map, you've got minerals, maybe a ridge close by, and then 2 geysers that are still in your main area but farther away, and so you would have to distance mine them. And so you still have some gas income to get stuff like Hydras or Dracodins or whatever. But if you want more than that, like, yeah, then you've got to invest a bit more. Or something. Just one example of like, you talked about delaying, the tech specifically. If it costs gas, then that would be the way to do it. It's just that would be very significant. And I actually don't know that it would be balanced because like Zerg needs 75 gas just to get the Hydrock then. So maybe if this became meta for the maps, then we would adjust the stats and the costs and stuff to as a result. But the tier 1 stuff is definitely an observation. I would like tier 1 to last longer. That's why I increased the cost of tier 2 for Terran and all this other stuff. Is like, if tier 1 lasts for longer, then you actually have to use more of the options in tier 1 instead of running away from it as you described. And I personally think like there's a meta waiting to develop for people who decide to explore the Scrapyard add-on and the Medbay add-on together using most of the tools in tier 1. And if you even want to add the Star Pad to that and get Anseals and stuff for more protection, like you can do stuff like that. And your tier 1 can be really competitive because I was able to defeat gateway armies with that, with just like a couple of clerics and like Goliath Blackjack and stuff. So it's not even particularly gas intensive in that context, right? The most gas you pay for, like the Goliaths and the Fulcrums to begin with. I feel like there's stuff that people just aren't using yet that could obviously change the game quite significantly.
Sure.
So that's another component of it is like, people's familiarity, even though like tier 1 is not the be all end all, obviously. A lot of people still aren't using a lot of the tools yet, or not in mixed compositions or whatever. So there's that. The other observation that was central to my more recent games is that even when I feel like I have been able to play the better strategic game, it does feel like maybe turtling is sometimes too effective between like Crucible Enchanted Static Defense for Protoss, obviously like the Ion Walls and Sentinels and stuff for Terran can be quite significant. So even if my opponent is on 2 bases contained and I have the whole rest of the map, it sometimes takes me an extra like 10 to 15 minutes to close the game, maybe even longer. And that does feel like maybe it's a little bit too much because like I've really out-strategied my opponent, outplayed my opponent quite significantly to get to that point. And so it seems a bit weird that it would take me so long to do that. So I don't know if that's just because I'm bad or if there's more to it than that.
I guess I would pose the question, like, if he can turtle, but you have the advantage, then why not just take the entire map and win that way?
That's what I said.
Would that be...
I did. I'm saying that in the examples where I took the entire map, I still took 20 minutes to close the game from there, which seems unnecessary and extra, right? So again, I don't know if it's just because I'm bad. I don't know if it's because, like, for example, Zerg artillery is pretty limited and like, 3.5 for the Cascathalor. You obviously get 2 for the Protathalor, and that's pretty good. Maybe I could have gone like Sovereign or something. I don't know. Like, that's obviously tier 3 as well. So there's like a lot of things that maybe, again, we just need to come up with compositions, and I wasn't using the right stuff. Like, that could definitely be the case.
Right.
And that would be one instance.
I think. Well, in that case, I feel like the static defense will be more effective because, like, so it's kind of hard to puff armies in Brood War.
Well, it's also you have the selection limit, right?
You have selection limit, so it's kind of hard to breach choke points and like well defended Terran bases or whatever.
I think that's definitely a contributing factor, yeah. So those are the 2 observations that I have. Yeah. I don't really know if there's anything actionable to do. I have some ideas about what we might do, like the geyser movements as like almost a wacky example, but like maybe that would popularize the town outposts a bit more since right now they're kind of overlooked. Obviously, the big problem for Terran is that the treasury is tier 2. If we decided to make it so that you needed the 500 gas for tier 2 before you could actually take the stuff. I mean, you could build the command center for 400 minerals. So, like, I guess you would still be able to do it. It just seems like maybe significantly expensive.
I don't know.
We'd have to think about it.
I was a bit curious if because we have less minerals in general, I was wondering if the expansion costing as much as it does doesn't make it more prohibitive to actually expand yearly, because then it's like you have less minerals in general, so expansion is a bigger portion of those minerals, and if you lose it, it's probably GG. And you also have less army to defend, which is another thing. So
well, that's only true in the early game, because once you get more than one base going, it's been the trend so far that you just have float like 20k minerals because we're all bad.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
that's true.
So yeah, I think there's just a lot of figuring out to do, but the pacing is definitely one thing where I think like games which last longer than 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever tend to be the more interesting ones. And the question becomes like, how do you make it so that you can how do you make it so that you're not removing decisions and lowering the skill floor or skill ceiling rather by making it so that it's easier to survive? Like I don't want to go the Age of Empires route where, town centers garrison workers and have weapons and stuff like that. That feels like it's just artificially extending the early game before the game resolves. And so, like
actually,
recently I've increased.
That Age of Empires does nicely is I feel I've been watching a bit of Age of Empires 4, even though it's not the greatest game. It has some like unique aspects to how it plays in the early game, and basically the way it does, like you won't really win the game against the good player in the early game, but like basically what the pressure is like you're fighting for map control of resources because they are not directly on the base, right?
Yeah.
You don't build a town center. You build you build
a gathering post or whatever it's called
or something, like a mill or whatever, and you basically take control of those, and you have few areas at the base that you have to protect. You like build some towers. You like try to take them up control while the enemy tries to poke holes, tries to find a weakness. Like you have way more it's way more open. And that's sort of the interesting part, but they sort of made it, like you said, it's sort of like cheap that they just get a town hall, like they get a shooting town hall and they get a garrison, right?
Yeah, so you just save all your villagers from harassment in that case, if they happen to be close to a town hall. So that's something that like I don't want the garrison thing. I don't want the town center's shooting stuff thing, because the whole idea is that like if I'm at your worker line and it's undefended, or if I've broken the defense, like the decision is, do I fight? Do I try to snipe the base? Do I try to snipe workers? If there's a defensive town center, then it kind of defeats the purpose of, the idea that you're going to snipe the town center specifically, or whatever. Because like in order to kill the defense, you also have to kill the town center. So you have to just ignore the workers, I guess. But or ignore the town center and kill the workers or whatever. Like it just becomes a little bit less interesting as like a balancing thing where like balancing your decision making as a player. Like sometimes it's good to try to snipe the town center because maybe you can actually break it down, or you can feign that you're doing that and wait for them to move your army and then do something else. I don't know. Like there's things that you can do, but if the town center is just passively killing units, then I don't know. Like I guess you can make it somewhat interesting.
It's also very tanky, so.
What happened?
The town halls are also very tanky.
Yeah.
You don't really siege them without siege units, so that's how it works.
I would prefer maybe to have some sort of behavior from a specialist unit for like one race or something that might do that. Like maybe you could imagine a unit, like a good version of the StarCraft 2 Queen would maybe enchant bases with some way of doing something to enemies, or I don't know, something like that, right?
When you said that, I just thought about photon overkill.
See, yeah, of course, that's the default
on
idea.
every building.
There's like StarCraft 2 with that. I think they removed that, and now instead they have shield battery overcharge. So
yes.
This the one button push things that are like global abilities are so insane to me.
I don't know. Like if I were to make something like that, I would just make it positional where you have to keep the unit there or something.
No, dude, you just have to build the shield battery close to your nexus. That's all.
No.
So yeah, I don't know. I think the something that would be a good version of that instinct of like, here's this utility unit that has defensive capabilities. Like I wouldn't even really want to pigeonhole it into defending only, because the whole idea of building a unit is that it's mobile. So I wouldn't really want a case where like, yeah, this unit's only good for defense. I actually kind of feel like phalanxes are in that boat right now, but it might just be because we're all too bad to actually move them up. Because when they do take a position forwardly, they can absolutely annihilate ground units. So I also think there's a lot of biases that are like subtle, but because we're bad and because Brood War has bad unit army movement or whatever, like the combination of those two things means we're actually not really usually interested in building ground armies in the mid to late game. Like we all want area armies so we can just ignore terrain and just like kill stuff that way. Obviously it has the downside of stacking infinitely because Brood War doesn't have area unit pathing and collision, but
like, I'm actually trying to force ground armies because I find them more interesting, but most people just will build area units into me and kill me that way, so.
Well, I think if you can, like, it requires more map control versus air units. But even then, I feel like, I don't know, the latest patch buffs static defense durability. So I feel like it's way harder to actually kill people with air units now, at least in the early stages of the game. But the idea of like us being too bad to actually use some of these tools to their full potential is definitely something that I believe in quite definitively.
What do you think about the thoughts that Mesk was posting about, like, increasing the durability of workers so they aren't as volatile, so they don't melt as quickly, especially like later?
Well, I think the reason why time to kill has been reduced in general, irrespective of workers, is because we've removed all the random stuff that we talked about before, all the delays. We've made it so that units are more responsive and snappy. Like that's one of the reasons why spider mines were so useless for a while, is you could just clear them by A moving because we increased the like rate of searching for a target when you're just in an attack move position or something. So you never had like occasional instances where it would work and occasional instances where the unit would just die. So like there's all sorts of stuff that's like that. And yes, the solution for the mines was to increase their durability, right? Like that's what I went with, and maybe I'll walk that back and change it or something. But like that's one of the things that I went with. So maybe the solution is also to raise the durability of workers. I guess that could work with it, but it feels like, as with the air units, the fact that they don't have collision makes it really, really difficult to balance intentionally, because you just have this interaction where any AoE is significantly more effective against air units and workers because of the fact that they they don't have collision, so they can stack up infinitely. You can have potentially infinite scaling of like capped by the fucking entity limit, obviously, but like you can have really, really good scaling from AoE because all of the splash damage would hit all the units.
Experiencing the madrigals, which obviously get benefited by the worker stacking and
of course,
general,
because you fit more workers in within their attack range, right? So like I've adjusted that by reducing the attack range of the madrigal in that mode, but like I don't know. Obviously, there's some points where you have to raise the white flag. We're not going to implement actual good pathing in Brood War, so like that's not in the cards. So we can't really do that with air units, and we can't really do that with workers. It would instantiate a lot of other changes anyway. That's something that we're experimenting with in Antikythera instead. So that's exciting stuff for sure. But I think, like one thing that this has definitely been good for is that CMBW being faster than Brood War has meant I actually want to test something that might be a little bit slower than Brood War, and that's actually our first game in Antikythera that we're building. Is it's going to be a little bit more on the slower pace side. So people who are feeling like maybe there's a bit of whiplash, maybe it's a little bit too fast in CMBW, we're actually going to try something that scales up a little bit slower. And as a result, I think that's the only, like, people talk about making RTS games more accessible. That's probably the only accessibility feature you need, to be honest, is a bit of a slower ramp up before you can get to the point where you're ending games. We just have to make it so that you're doing interesting decisions. And, Age of Empires kind of has that, because you do economic stuff and go hunting for resources and look for map control and scout and all this other shit. But I think you can still achieve something like that without it being like, I don't know. The concern about raising the time cost of tech structures, for people who are wondering, because that's the obvious solution to Veeq's point about like maybe the tech should be delayed, is if you ever need to pivot in the middle of the game, like you're being nerfed, but your pivot is nerfed by the fact that you we wanted it so that the first tech structure was slower, because it's not like Brood War where the spawning pool unlocks the Hydralisk Den. It's, you can build either of those and a Zorka's Shroud from the beginning of the game, and so you have access to more stuff. If you ever decide I went Quasrock opener and now I need Hydrock, or vice versa, those are the most common openers for Zerg. Like now you're nerfed in terms of the pivot. So I don't really know what the solution to that would be that wouldn't potentially cause issues where the game still ends early because I needed to pivot and I couldn't do it in time because of like a 15-second increase to time cost or whatever. You know what I mean? So I feel like it's a difficult thing to balance in that sense. You don't want to be like balancing for one thing and then accidentally nerf or change or whatever a bunch of other things as a result, right? Like there's second and third order consequences.
Well,
to all this.
I guess the way to address that fact is increasing the that doesn't work for Zerg at all. That would require X loads. But if you increase the time cost of individual units too, then you actually get more time to scout, and then you have more time to pivot. So then you use it with the structure that takes more time to build. That makes sense.
I don't see how increasing the time cost of Zerg units would. Are you saying any units other than Zerg?
I'm saying that for Zerg units it doesn't work because larva spawns at consistent interval. But like if you think for Terrans and like let's say they go vulture heavy and you see them building like 3 factories and each factory like vulture takes like 30 seconds to build now or something. Then you actually get more time before they amass an army. So you get more time for the pivot.
I guess, but you don't really know what they're building, so like I guess you can still pivot anyway with the idea that they could be building something. And I guess if you see 3 Fulcrums, that would be an example that they are definitely going mech heavy. But usually your enemy is not going to save enough money to do all of that at once. So I don't know if that example is super good. I think just seeing it at all would be enough to say, hey, we have to smooch stuff a little bit differently here. We have to change stuff a little bit differently. So I don't know. I'll think about what might be done differently with the tech stuff. Maybe some units can get increased time costs. I actually did that a little bit for Protoss because when I decreased or when I nerfed the costs of the tech centers for Terran, I knew that the Zerg was in a pretty solid spot already. I didn't really need to adjust them too much. The Protoss, on the other hand, I mostly just needed to stagger out some of their more powerful options, so it took a little bit longer to get to a killing blow with them. So I did actually adjust time costs as a result. But yeah, maybe that can be applied more broadly. I don't know. I feel like I don't have the same problem of dying in the early game as other people do because I've gotten good enough at the early game as it is. So it's really hard for me to even acknowledge what the issue is or understand what the issue is to most people. I think taking longer to get to comparable unit counts for army sizes would be good, but I need to do that without I need to find a good way to do that without making it so that it's super easy to just not play skillfully and still have an advantage, right? And you're taking away room for decisions to be made if you take away units. So I have to think about a way to do that nicely, basically.
Well, if you increase the time cost of units, then you sort of drain less minerals, so you can afford to have more production. So, I feel like it would even out in terms of unit counts. You just need more production. I don't know. That's something to think about, I guess. Anyways, I don't know what would be the next talking point at this point. I don't know if we're wrapping this up or...
I think so, because the Fraudarchy is coming up pretty soon. So I guess we can think about what to sign off with and what we'll be talking about next time. This is one of the episodes where we had a lot, because there was so much to talk about, because there was so much that happened. We didn't even really cover too much on the Antikythera Thera side. We talked about the pitch and what we're going to be doing and stuff, so we shed some more light on our first title, but I think we could definitely talk a bit more about AI and pathfinding and some of the other technical stuff and how it's how the conceptual deviations of our first RTS game are going to set us apart from the competition, not just in terms of the content, but in terms of the tech tree stuff. We might be able to shed some more light and explain a little bit more about that and all of that good shit. So that's probably the teaser for the next episode, and maybe we'll even get it done sooner than a month and a week or whatever.
Yeah, hopefully. A month and a week.
Month and a week into next week.
Yeah.
So, next week. See you guys next week, I guess. Oh, shit.